And good morning. Here we go. Why did it not start? That's interesting.
So I don't know why there's not someone who hasn't done this yet, but utilizing the digital retailing tool with an AI like tour that walks you through and says, okay, now you need to do the trade-in. You don't want to do that? Okay, we can do this piece. Would you like to do this piece? So I think that would be a really good, just kind of a shove into the whole AI digital retailing portion and maximizing, someone's time. Because how many times do you have customers who sit there and they'll be like, well, I click, wait a minute, how do I go to the next?
Right.
I don't want to put that in there. And they're stuck, or they stop, or they call the store. So I think that would be a good kind of overlay into a digital retailing with AI and just handhold someone to walk through that. Because I guarantee once people walk through it and they realize how much time they save, they're probably not going to buy a car differently after that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we started down that road, and we're kind of at a fork in the road now, where it's like, okay, we can't really go back, can't really put the genie back in the box, but at the same time, we need to make changes. And I always use a couple brands as an example. If you have some time in your hands and you want to see how you can break a website for a car brand, definitely take a look at the Ferrari site and try and build a car, because there's so many options that eventually the computer just crashes because there's too much. But when I
Unfortunately, 9/11, and that can be the same thing.
Wow.
Red color and stuff,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
there's only so much to load in there.
Yeah, yes and no, but I think Porsche was smart in terms of that they have basically forced the dealership experience and the OEM experience to be in lockstep, which I think you're going to see with Genesis and Hyundai and other brands, especially as Amazon works with them. But that's another thing that comes up, where if I go to a McDonald's to pick a restaurant, I don't get a Big Mac differently at different restaurants. It's pretty consistent. So I think that's part of it, but also, what does the customer want? And I think what's happened when I sold cars that has, the steps to the sale, for example, I think what's happened now is it's like, okay, what step did you want to do next? And as we look at things around possibly credit challenge people, or changing models, or changing customer behavior, even changing how people buy vehicles. I mean, I worked for Nissan Infinity for a while, and I was talking to a gentleman I used to work with, and his big challenge, since he works on the finance side of the business, and his job is to help dealers sell products, is now the way people are buying cars has changed because of affordability. So they're doing a lot more short-term leases. So that makes it a challenge for that dealer to make money in the back end, for example, and for him to train him how to do that. But I would argue the same is true when you look at how people service vehicles, specifically on the EV side, but also even on the gas side, with a move towards hybrids or gas or electric. They're selling prepaid maintenance, they're building that into a lease. The leases are shorter term. Customers that are younger have less dollars to spend. So that they're really looking at this, but more importantly, what's the best for the brand, the dealer, and the customer moving forward? Because I don't think younger generations look at a car purchase the same way I would. And I think that was why it was kind of interesting when it was like older millennials, younger millennials. Just because I thought that was an interesting split. You can order it right from CDK. It's called Insights. So this is the book. If you want a copy, I'm sure get Troy to send you one. He's one of the sponsors of the show, to be transparent, but it has a lot of really good data. And there's even some stuff on F&I, which I thought was interesting, being that I used to do that. But and I guess the other thing is, attracting people to the business. When I got in the business 25 years ago, it was challenging to attract people to work in the business. And I know gender-wise, we've had many shows on this, because not only is it challenging to attract women to the business, it's more challenging to retain women than men. I guess my question would be, as a woman in the car business, what advice would you give to young women who maybe, or older women who are looking for a change and want to look at the car business, whether it be on the vendor side or the retail side? I mean, what would your advice be?
Have a plan. Where you want to go,
Right.
And talk to a lot of different people. Attend industry events. There's a lot of, I'm actually going to Women in Automotive in a couple of weeks. There's lots of women-focused events like that. But find women in roles that look like they might be interesting to you, and see what their path was to get there. And then don't let anybody detract you from that path. So if you have, I mean, I have my goal in front of me every day and I read it every day when I walk in my home office.
Yeah.
So just have that goal, have that path, put yourself in front of women in roles that you would like to be in, and just ask for them. Probably got you.
So that wasn't exactly the clip I wanted, but again, I was challenging there. But when you're looking at women and women specifically buying, maybe we'll talk about that on the show. This interview is really interesting because it was talking about it from a women in auto point of view. But let me go to the starting video here. Here we go. 1 second. And good morning.
name's Tony Lynn. I'm the general manager of Fred Bean's Kia in Langhorne. I just wanted to take a minute to talk about Larry Feldman, Career Changers USA. Larry and I have been working together for about the last 12 years now. And anything I've ever needed as far as recruiting, training, Larry's been right there. Larry's got me salespeople, he's got me managers, he's got me technicians even through the toughest times in the industry. And he is just the kind of guy who's going to tell you exactly what's on his mind. He's going to tell you exactly what he thinks. But Larry also has the expertise to back it up. When he was in the dealership world, he was a top performer. And that's really important to my staff, especially as it pertains to training. A lot of people can come in and teach out of a textbook, but Larry has real world experience dealing with customers, dealing with situations in dealerships that we go through on a daily basis and try to train on. But Larry's been through it, so he can really empathize with the people and tell you what's worked for him and maybe what way not to go. Larry is just always at a 10. I mean, his energy level is always up there. And I think people, they just love that and they feed off of it. He's not faking it. He is genuinely excited to come in and help you. He's excited to come in and help grow your business. And he's one of those people who just really enjoys seeing dealers succeed and have a lot of fun at the same time.
Life is about connection. Having a support system to lean on. And roads to endless possibility. At every turn, guiding the way, we are building the connections that move you.
So what would your dealership feel like if your entire sales staff was literally on fire, your sales and service staff? They were nonstop all over social media, completely dominating your marketplace. They could do it in 30 days or less and then continue their education to do it for an entire 6 months or a year. You literally would completely take over the entire marketplace and no one would be able to compete with you. And that's what we can do for you. So when you're walking around your community, whether you're at local restaurants or you're going to the gym, you don't want to be bothered? Fine, you won't be bothered. But a lot of people will walk up to you and say, oh my God, I love your social media. Your staff is amazing. We love what you're doing in the community. We want to come buy a car from you. We want to get an oil change at your dealership. Your community is absolutely going to love you. And it doesn't matter what platform you're on. You could be on TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all social media platforms. You will literally be all over the place. And not only will you have ads running, but your own staff is going to be promoting your brand and promoting themselves within the dealership and within the business. So it's like running an ad times 100-fold because your entire staff is participating in the process. I've traveled all over North America. I've trained Toyota. I've trained Nissan. I've been to driving sales. I've been to Women in Auto. I get hired as a speaker for conferences at universities all over the country. And I can help change the trajectory of your dealership right now.
Good morning and welcome. And I did get some positive news on the CDK front this morning. It looks like there's going to be compensation for dealers from CDK, if you didn't already know that. So that's great news. And it looks like they're on the road to fixing that problem, from what I understand. So congratulations to them. And dealers, obviously, you'll be hearing from your rep, I'm sure. First of all, welcome. As usual, we have Mr. Groden, formerly of Google, and of course, Larry Feldman. And I guess the big question was embracing change. We talked a little bit before the show about women being a part of the car decision. Shockingly, I always found this to be a crazy number, but I would think that when I sold cars, it was about 80% of that decision. But I mean, maybe I'm wrong on the data, but Matt, why don't you introduce yourself and, tell us a little bit more about what your thoughts are on that and what you think the best way to embrace change is, in your opinion.
Yeah. Just start small, right, Ian? Just start with the small topics.
Yeah.
So I'm Matthew Grouden, for those who don't know me. I spent the better part of a decade at Google working in the automotive team. Now I am working on a few different things. I am teaching at the Automotive Business School in Barrie at Georgian College. And I am also consulting in a couple of different places at smaller groups and doing some OEM work as well. And I publish a weekly newsletter that you can Google and you can find. But this is a super interesting topic. I mean, it's kind of like the women in auto, women car shoppers in auto, and change their good little concentric circles because there's a lot of overlap there. What is telling from this call alone is that we started this conversation with this particular topic, and there's not a single woman on the call, right? And that's not an uncommon phenomena in auto. I had a very similar experience. I started including some slides and some presentations. I started at the end of last year and throughout this year about how women feel in the car buying experience. And the answer, the spoiler alert, not good. Like, the answer is they don't feel good about it. There was also a really great piece of research that was done, actually funded by Clutch a couple of years back, where they pointed out they got Ipsos to back this up with data to say that almost 90% of women show up to a dealership with their human shield, right? Like, basically 89% of women show up with their husband, father, boyfriend, best friend. Like, they show up with their male human shield because they feel like they're not going to be taken seriously. And that's a huge problem. But I was presenting that data at an event, room full of OEM folk, dealership folk, not a single woman in the room. And what occurred to me then, which I now like to wrap that data around, is this notion that you hear it, you see it, posts, in person when you're talking to general managers, leadership at an auto group, that selling cars is a people business. And my rebuttal to that is that if this was if car selling, if the car business was a people business, half the salespeople would be women. Like, that there's pretty simple math that if we were going to reflect the buying population just on on an optics level, if we were going to represent the population of people who buy cars, we would have a lot more women in automotive, and we don't. And it is not necessarily an easy problem to solve. And I mentioned this to somebody else fairly recently, and they quipped that even when you try and have an event and you want to bring in those female voices as speakers, as panelists, it's always the same 5 women. Like it's like you have the same 5 representatives from the same auto groups, the same companies, and that continues to be a problem. It's kind of like that was a well-established, well-known problem pre-COVID, and then COVID caused us to forget this as a problem, and then it's now like oh crap, it's almost 5 years later, and we're in exactly the same situation we were then. Change is a whole other can of worms, and I think the thing about change is that if you want to invite change into an organization, if you were a business owner and you want to invite it, you have to build that into your culture, and that becomes problematic because I'm not sure that folk at a dealership think of their dealership as a business culture. Like you would have to actually start with the notion of, I define a business culture that we are going to reflect in our business. And then as part of that culture, we're going to adopt change as part of the mentality. And so without the notion of understanding business culture, hard to institute or embrace change as a function of that culture. What I would often speak of, or where I've often kind of leaned in when it comes to like, how would you do it? Like, what would it take to start to instill change in automotive in general? It's not even, this is not a dealership specific problem. Same problem exists at OEM. And so Google used to like to say things like, we should, aim for the moon. We should aim for the big, hairy, audacious goal, right? And that even if we don't hit that goal, maybe we still like 10x something. We still scale in a way that we didn't expect to scale. And that's great if you're Google or Microsoft or Amazon or Meta. It is not great if you're a 50-year established operating dealership, right? Because there's nothing to 10x that business. Like there's no way to unless 1 million people move into your neighborhood, which might be happening in Toronto, but unless that happens, there's no way to actually do that. So the better approach, instead of like, let's, moonshot or 10x or triple scale our business, is to think about the notion of the aggregation of marginal gains, which is a general methodology of, instead of aiming for big changes, it's to find all of the small changes. It's to look at everything in your business, and instead of expecting a 5 or 10 or 20% incremental change, find the 1% changes everywhere. And if everybody culturally starts to look for, well, what would our coffee be like if it was just 1% better? And what would our service bays look like if they were just 1% more efficient, more on time? What if culturally we were 1% more keyed into the community? So just identifying all of the places where you can tighten the screw, make a 1% change. The aggregation of all of those 1% changes can be very profound. So that's usually the methodology I kind of suggest, and it's built off of something that's now been repeated 1,000 times, if not more, in the James Clear book Atomic Habits, where he tells that story of the Sky team, the Sky racing team, the cycling team, which was for many years the worst Tour de France performing team in Tour history, so bad that they couldn't even get a sponsorship. Like they couldn't even get them. No one would give them bikes. They were so horrible. And so they got a new coach, and the new coach brought in this idea of, let's just find the 1% changes everywhere. And then they won. He was like, we'll win in 5 years. If we do this, it'll take a while, but we'll win in 5. They actually won in 3, and they've won almost every tour except for one, I believe, since. So, it's the change is hard, but it has to be it has to start top down, and then you have to institute it in some way culturally and encourage it. The other problem with that in general, and it's not something that in automotive we're very comfortable with, is that when you try new things, you have to get comfortable with failure. And we're not comfortable with that either. We don't, one bad month, it's the end of the world. So the general sense, right, is that there are some big mindset changes that need to occur, and they're probably more digestible if they're swallowed in small bits.
That's great. And I thought about this, Larry, as I was listening to Matthew talk about little incremental change. And there's a number of gentlemen who talk about 10x, 100x, 800x, all this stuff. And not to beat them up, but at the end of the day, I think it's much more productive to say, hey, where can I, how can I increase a little bit on each area? And cumulatively, that's a much bigger growth curve, and it's probably more attainable. But what's your opinion? I mean, you're in dealerships all the time. You on the staffing side. I mean, obviously, it would be perfect if you could get a demographic that matched gender-wise anyway, the male and female buyer. But what's your opinion on the challenges there and change and adapting to that?
Well, a bunch of things. First, the last 4 or 5 classes I've had a woman or two at least in each class get hired. So I'm doing my own little part the best way I can. As I said to you and Brody before the show started, I always quote Ben Franklin: "When you're finished changing, you're finished." And I think it is now okay for your CDK commercial, which you ran at the beginning, to remove the number for the suicide prevention hotline, because that was very useful for dealers for a while there. Confucius said the hardest part of the journey is the first step. Bradley's right. You start small. This nonsense with this is like saying I'm going to lose 7 pounds. It ain't easy unless you cut your head off. But if you say I'm going to lose a pound or two, if you do things in small increments, it's easier to measure. It's easier not to get discouraged. I just think it's like everything else. Let's look at things long term. Let's have a plan. Let's be prepared to fail on the plan, right? Because if you're not failing, I got a great magnet. I quote it all the time on my refrigerator. It's by Mario Andretti. It says, if you're in complete control, you're not going to fix them. To get stronger, you have to break down the muscles to build them back up. If you work out just till you're tired and stop, you're never going to get any farther than you are. Hey, gentlemen, I'm going to switch this over to my cell. I'll talk as long as I can, and then if I can, with the meeting I got to go to, I'll sneak out. I hate to jump out. I love talking to you two guys, but as far as change, man, if you're not going to change, everything's going to change around. You're going to fall back. I remember when they started using computers in the dealership that I wound up owning, guys quit. I'm not using the damn computer. When leasing came in, it's everybody wants to be resistant to change. But guess what? Maybe the change you're going to make makes your life better. Everything is impossible until the minute it happens. Penicillin was an accident. They discovered it off of moldy bread. You just don't know until you take a shot.
That's great thought.
All right, I'm going to switch over. I'll try to hang in with you guys as long as I can. It's a pleasure to see you and hang in with you, and I'll talk to you soon. And listen, when you talk to CDK, see if I can get a check. I'm not a dealer anymore. But I've had mental anguish listening to all these dealers cry and complain. Probably will get you some money too.
I like that.
I give you more of my portion, but I want you to get used to failure so you can grow as a human.
I appreciate it.
Hey, I'm good like that.
Yeah, well, it's funny you bring that up, Larry. I was talking to, I was watching a video this morning about the guy from Dirty Jobs who created that show, Dirty Jobs. And at
by the way, Mike Rowe, go see his movie. It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's called Something Worth Standing Up For. It is. I can't recommend it highly.
Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. It was interesting because he was on with the guy from Dr. Phil talking about how he got into that show, how he did that. And he said, well, I was a reporter in San Francisco, and they had a cameraman, and they said, they kind of let me do whatever I want. And I thought it'd be a really good idea to go into the San Francisco sewers for an episode, not telling them I was doing this, of course. And what ended up happening was he ended up losing his job, but it ended up creating the Dirty Jobs series. But the thing that was interesting wasn't that. The inspiration was his mother calling him because I think his grandfather was 90, And his grandfather was one of these guys who didn't finish high school, but did a lot of things like architect, fix stuff, did a bunch of things with his hand. He said, I wasn't very good at that, but I was inspired by my grandfather. And so I thought it'd be a really interesting idea to go focus on the people that maybe did things to maintain everything that we deal with in a day. And it was interesting because he says, you know, it's unscripted. You basically just go in with a camera and you ask people stuff and they talk to you about it. And he said that there's an unwritten rule between all the different trades that they all have a hell of a sense of humor because they have to. But more importantly, they have to deal with people who think that this stuff just runs itself. And I thought that was really, really interesting when you look at change, especially as we talk a little bit, you know, on the positive on the CDK front, is people that have been used to doing things with technology probably for 15, 20 years are now having to go back to when they did it with pen and paper temporarily. And I think that was a hard change, but it proves that we're resilient in the car business because, you know, we did that.
I told this story last week, but if you're going to mention, I'm just going to repeat myself. Forgive me.
Go ahead.
When I do my recruiting, I print the name of the person, their phone number, and their email. And about one of every third or fourth dealers, and you know I'm everywhere, says, "God, that's ridiculous. Why not use the computer?" Every damn one of them says, "Your son was done. You're the only thing that's working in this store because you have a piece of paper." And he said, "Roe, with the sense of humor, you've been around me enough to know I might be the only vendor that when I tell dealers why they should hire me, it's because I'm fun and I bring energy. Not a bunch of nonsense and algorithms, because none of that stuff I understand anyway. I'm the exact opposite of Bradley. Take the computer apart, put it back together. It takes me an hour to figure out how to open my garage with the remote."
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting that you bring that up because I remember when we used to write people's names on the back of business cards or cue cards or whatever. And that was because I worked at a dealer that didn't have a CRM unless you were in the finance office or the sales manager. Right?
Yeah, but what goes to the CRM if nobody puts the information in?
Oh, 100%.
We're raising a generation of idiots that type everything in their phone and 8 seconds later don't remember what they typed in or it gets lost in spam. I don't care. I don't care if you get Elon Musk on here. Computers are great. AI is great. You still need a pen and a piece of paper because all that information correlates to itself. And guess what? You wake up one day and don't remember what you have. Brownie, am I correct? Well, you must get 90 million pieces of spam. If it's important, you write it down somewhere.
Yes, the established research says that if you actually want to remember something, you need to write it. You need to write it.
For the record, he worked for Google, and I occasionally use Google when I try to see what's playing at the movie. It's like we're twins.
Yeah, that's so true. But I mean, as we look at change, and that doesn't mean you should forget what you already know, or maybe learn the things you should know, which is something that I guess has been the bane of my existence in the last several years, is the fact that people don't know the basics in some cases. But as we see a rate of change increase, and I'm looking at redefining a sales process for the company I work for using a bunch of traditional and AI tools, and the number that really shocked me from this gentleman out of California that I saw this webinar of last week was basically he doesn't use email for sales anymore because he says basically 70% of his business comes from other means, which I thought was interesting. But what was really interesting was that the use of technology only complements those traditional skills. And I think that's where the rate of change, but more importantly, the ability to embrace change makes sense. And I guess that's really the question, Matthew, here is you're looking at going, okay, it's hard to change, but if you embrace change and you embrace the fact that the rate of change is accelerating, do you think that acceleration is going to be a permanent growth area, or you think it's going to accelerate at a constant, or do you think it's just going to be just hard to keep up with? I mean, that's where I see the biggest, I think, fear out there. What do you think?
Well, there's that quote. The guy who wrote Future Shock, right? That the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those right that cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. He wrote that book in 1978. So I don't expect the rate of change to slow down at all. In fact, I think what we're seeing with what is happening with AI, and it comes in useful waves. There was lots of interests and fervor when OpenAI first released ChatGPT, and then a bunch of other tools followed, and then it kind of waned a bit. Obviously, people are working in the background, and then a new piece of technology comes out and wows people. But I think we can expect that change as far as knowledge, technology, everything is going to continue on a rate that is going to be difficult for most people to absorb. And I think that's the real problem. Like outside of just dealerships, outside of automotive, it's that, how do you choose what you need to know? Like, how do you choose what you actually need to lean into? And this notion that, it may be in some way cyclical, that there might be things and your paper example at dealership is a good one. The one that's been true for the longest time, and I've talked about it, I think, on this podcast before, is the phone call. Is that still probably the most effective way to get someone into the dealership is to just answer the phone. And there seems to, and another example that has come up or become, resurfaced on my radar, which was a little surprising to me, was I was moderating a workshop just a couple of months ago, and I mentioned something offhandedly about email marketing, and it's like the entire room's eyes glazed over, and I was like, wait a minute, who is using email marketing successfully? And of a room of 30 dealer marketing people, one person put up their hand. I'm like, email still works. Email didn't stop working. There wasn't a point in time when CRM-based email marketing stopped working. You just chose to stop using it. So we had to have a follow-up after that where we brought in, a third voice, a different voice, someone I know that has worked in that space for a couple of decades to just talk about, what is the current state of email marketing. And I think that that's really the trick. And one of the things that I try and instill in my students at school and my son is really this notion of you need to be a lifelong learner. You just need to be able to know that everything you know today is probably wrong, and that in 10 years you're going to have an entirely different set of skills. You're going to be working in an entirely different set of tools, that you might be browsing on an entirely different type of computer.
Yep. That
this stuff changes all the time, and that if you want to participate in it, sure, you can go plant trees. You can there are lots of places where the change is not so acute, or the rate of change is not so aggressive. But if you want to be on top of this stuff, and you want to stay current on technology, and you want to stay then current on what your customers' needs are, then it's important to kind of measure, iterate, and change on a regular basis. And that's a general sense, a general methodology that I don't think is very common at dealership or in automotive in general. And the thing that has crept up on us, and I feel like I'm rambling here a little bit.
Yeah, but,
so stop me, interject whenever.
Let me give you the high level here. So, I have a significant email list. I email about 14,000 people a week, a couple times a week, and growing. I've been doing it for a number of years, and I'm pretty astute with data and specifically with email. This gentleman, I think he's based out of California, I believe. Anyway, deep marketing experience in Silicon Valley. Was looking for ways to be a fractional CMO and gain clients, much like everybody else who's a former, 10, 12, 15-year CMO, whatever. And his biggest challenge was the following. Number one, identifying the key prospect. Number two, building a system that was predictable and scalable that used multiple pieces of technology to engage and convert that customer. And what he said, and he's a very data-centric guy, more of a Procter & Gamble based database marketer versus your traditional, let's create cool Super Bowl commercial guy, right. Which I instantly respect, because I actually had the benefit of a teacher that worked for Procter & Gamble in my MBA who taught me a lot about marketing math. But what was interesting was he said, okay, before the pandemic, this was true. And he was talking about email to a certain degree. And he says, after the pandemic, it's a multiple touch point system using multiple software where email might be part of it. And I'm listening to that and I'm going, interesting. And then he started talking about, predictable growth of 33% a year for a company in a very competitive space using multiple pieces of software. Now, it's kind of like baking a cake with 4 or 5 different pieces of software as part of that recipe. So I don't know 100% yet how all those pieces are going to fit together for me. But what got me interested was the fact that he was really looking at that data all the time, and he was able to predict growth, but more importantly, able to adapt to in a highly adaptable environment that's needed, where most people are kind of like, this is what I've always done. And it kind of aligned with sort of my philosophy with change, hence the thought of the show. But also when I look at the good side of change, and I look at the good side of using AI as an example, let's just say there's 8 pieces of software in here, 3 pieces of software, and they may not all work for you, but a lot of this software can actually make you more efficient. And I think that's where people, I know there's a lot of blame that the politicians are why our productivity is crappy. I would say that distraction is why our productivity is crappy. And if you can focus on that 1% change and measuring that and monitoring it, but also maybe adding tools that make your outreach or your communication more effective over time, which I've always thought is the long tail, that's where I think it's going. And when you look at the good side of change, I see it as computers, for me at least, maybe 40 years ago now, were kind of a new thing. It was like, wow, computer, what does that do? And now it's like, well, what part of the computer should you use? What piece of software should you use? Where does that software fit into that baking of a cake? What does that look like? And I think the thing to me was, okay, let's look at all these pieces. How do we put them together? But more importantly, how do we measure that? And I think that's the challenge a lot of people have, is there's so many options. Social media, digital media, advertising, email, text messaging, direct messaging, different platforms, all this stuff. What they've forgotten about is the customer that they're trying to chase is also overwhelmed. So email on its head is not bad. It's just it's in that pile of distraction that you're dealing with every day. So how do you stand out? But more importantly, how do you engage? And the thing,
I think the trick with email, and I think where people got a little gun shy, was that where with most of the media that somebody might buy in a small business at a dealership, the platforms, for the most part, respect the rules that are the law of the land, right? So if the government of Canada sets down new regulations in terms of data privacy and data controls, then Meta, Google, Alphabet, everyone has to kind of comply. Yeah. So if you're using those tools, then it's Meta and Google that might be at fault, and not likely the advertiser. Where if you're doing email marketing, that responsibility really lies on the advertiser, right? It doesn't rely on MailChimp. It's not MailChimp's fault if you start violating Castle rules, right? The Canada anti-spam legislation. Yeah. And so I think the legislation implications and sort of some bad stories and bad actors cause people to get really gun shy. The other part is, you're absolutely right, and this is probably the next in the series of workshops, and that is what I have defined for many years as, I've heard it described and explained on one side, it's like your, as an organization, as a business, your marketing and media ecosystem, right? So you can define what that is based on your target buyers, right? So, and then an understanding of, based on that ecosystem, what are the right levers to pull and push, and at what level to make sure that you are honing in on the customers that make sense for your business. The word that I use is orchestration. That you need to kind of understand that, okay, if we first collect some data, we collect some email addresses and phone numbers, now what do we do with it? Like, how do we leverage that? So if we've paid whatever it is, either they're coming through the website, and maybe they got to the website through a Google ad or a Meta ad or a TikTok ad. It's fully understanding okay, so getting the lead was really just step one in this exercise. It wasn't the end of this exercise. And now how do we nurture that into an actual, from prospect to sale? And the general nurturing that I think most people experience is phone calls and text until they submit, right? Like it's basically a beaten into, you either end up buying or you hate that dealership forever. And that maybe there's a middle ground there. Like maybe there's another way to approach that.
Well, he was talking about it like the fly swatter approach. Bam!
Right.
And I thought that was really interesting because you see this from other countries on a global scale, no matter what the industry. And the thing that was really interesting from a strictly sales perspective, and it may vary based on your industry, is number one, very personalized messages. Yes. He showed a piece of technology that was kind of interesting, but also kind of creepy, which uses the disc profile to analyze LinkedIn profiles and then talk to you about messaging in real time, which is interesting, which uses AI, I'm sure, in a bunch of data sets. But I looked at it and I said, he said years ago it was let's chase that sale. And today it's more like, how do I cultivate that customer and be different from the fly swatter dealer or the fly swatter company to turn that into a sale over time? And he was actually talking about inbound sales versus outbound closing, which was interesting. But the key piece of it, and I've always been a fan of data in general, but is what is your current process? What is your competition or other brands doing? How are you personalizing that message and process to that consumer or potential consumer? How are you retaining that customer who's in sales, service, whatever, in auto? But more importantly, how are you learning from that? And I think that the email is a great example. There's lots of tools for customer journey and customer cultivation and personalization today that didn't exist 10 years ago that are key part of that success. But more importantly, if I'm looking at the move from customers who used to walk into the dealership or send, to your point, a shield in, like my brother's daughter needs a van, and I don't think she's ever went into a dealership. She sends her dad to do the heavy lifting. But, when you look at it, it's that 5 to 30 minute car purchase experience. And that moving forward, I think eventually will be all done remotely. So it's really a question of how do you learn now and embrace the change to cultivate that customer experience from start to close over time versus I got to sell them right now, which is that classic, I'm waiting for the up bus concept at a car dealership. So when you're looking at the challenge with change and you're looking at the opportunities, I think it's really about, how do you use tools to develop your own secret sauce for that dealership, deal group, or OEM and implement that and test it to see how you can stand out. I mean, when I managed an internet department 25 years ago, almost now, the key secret to my success was just having a long-term strategy and executing it at a high level. And I think that's easier today with the tools that exist, but also better because I can customize a message to Matthew over time. I can customize a message to Jane. I can customize a message to Matthew and Jane if it's the same email. I can do that. And historically, it was more generic. But even a generic message versus no message is probably a good plan. So when you're looking at dealers and you're looking at customers and you're looking at change, I think the biggest challenge is how does a dealer who's set on that 30-day close or that 1-day close or that week close from an internet lead really start expanding their mind and saying, hey, it isn't about, mowing down all these customers today. It's about how do I consistently predict that sale of customers? Like what is your thinking on that sort of, I guess, mind-bending view for a dealer?
Yeah. Well, I put this presentation together and I've only really presented it, I guess, twice now.
Okay.
Once. I built it for an event back in May or June, and then I presented it once at a workshop as well because they were curious about the slides. And the name of the deck, the name of the presentation is intended to be a little controversial, and It's just that leads are destroying your business.
Yeah.
Was the
Yeah.
punch in your face of the presentation. But the interesting things, and there's a whole, I won't go into the whole nuts and bolts of it. We actually touched on what the cornerstone of that presentation was, and that was to stop talking about stop focusing on the lead and focus on the person. Because once you basically absorb that the lead is a person, you're not just beating them up to get them in, you're actually treating them because they have specific needs. Like, you're focused on their needs
Right.
as a person, not as the somebody who must show up in the dealership by Saturday. After I gave that presentation the first time, somebody in the crowd put up their hand and they said, if you could tell then dealerships one thing they need to really do. I had a few things they were supposed to do at the end anyway, but they're like, if you were like, what's the one? And I'm like, the one thing? Like, what's the one? And they're like, what is the one thing? And I thought about it for a minute. I was silent for a minute. I said, the problem, like the structural foundational problem is that organizationally, there's no one who's focused on an annual plan, or that annual plan is really only built around what your sales target is. It doesn't include all the other things that need to happen in your dealership, whether that's a marketing plan or a resource plan or so the fallout of that is no dealership can get out of its 30-day cycle. Like, they can't get out of their month-long sales cycle that they run towards every month and have a moment where they pause and think about, how would we go about hiring more women in our dealership? How would we go about changing the way we market to our consumers so that the consumer doesn't feel like they've been beat up before they show up at the dealership? And so I said, let's be clear, the salespeople probably still need to live in that 30-day world, but somebody in the dealership shouldn't. Like, there should be someone who has that, we have a plan, we're sticking to a plan, we're going to check in on our plan quarterly, we're going to put in things in that planning cycle that say, like, this year in Q1, we're going to focus on changing the way we hire, or maybe just getting an HR person, depending on where they're at, right? Like, it's that plan, the high level plan is really built around, let's target and map out all those things that we need to do, that we know we should be doing, we've been told we should be doing by people at conferences, by the OEM for the last decade, and we're still not doing them. And the only way you're ever going to get there is that if you kind of pull back that 50,000 foot view of the business and plan for those things on a monthly and quarterly basis outside of the trappy or 30-day sales cycle.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that now with OEMs and some larger dealer groups saying, I have a customer experience person, or I have someone who's sales and customer experience, or experience driven, to use another term. And I know BMW with the BMW Genius and Porsche to a limited degree played around with this kind of idea of having like a product expert in the dealership versus a salesperson. But I think at the end of the day, what you see today versus I would say 5 years ago is, consumers are now more portable than they've ever been. And really what makes the difference is not the brand anymore. And I think that's why really, whether it be a dealer, OEM, dealer group, or individual dealership, or even salesperson or manager, you've got to say, okay, where's my experience at right now? What's it like for a consumer when they come to ABC dealership to buy a vehicle,
right,
whether they be male or female? What does that look like? And then the question I would ask is, what could it look like? How could you enhance that experience? Is it communication alone? Is it experience in the store? Is it, that 1% better coffee, to quote somebody, I think it was you, and then, is that enough? But more
right,
importantly, it isn't even brand centric. There's no reason you couldn't have a luxury experience at, a Kia store, or a luxury experience at, even VinFast, to pick another brand that's new on the scene. But also, if your experience is that much better, and I think someone online was quoting this, they were saying, well, yeah, people want to pay more to buy cars here because the experience was better. So instead of saying, hey, here's the sticker price, you should pay this because that's what everyone else is doing. Well, or the VIP fee because my experience is so good. Well, no, I'm happy to pay more than that because it was a good experience. You know, I'm happy to not question anything. Like I like the fact that you made it easy. And I think that starts with just doing an evaluation of how does that start online for the customer? What's the website experience like? What's the lead experience like? If they call the store, do they hang up on them 80% or is it 40%? I mean, those kind of things. If they do a video call or a chat, how's that experience? And you don't just have to look at automotive. I think that's the mistake a lot of dealers and OEM make. What's the best experience online for any company that you do business with? Is that Amazon for you? Is it Costco? Is it Apple? I mean, you pick it. I mean, I'll use the example myself. I had a coffee experience with my workhorse computer at home where I destroyed it pretty much with a cup of coffee. So I was like, oh no, I just destroyed this machine. So I took it in. It happened to be an Apple machine to do desktop video editing. So I went to Apple. They said, well, the good news is you have the extended warranty. And the better news is the worst case scenario, you're going to be owing us $400 to fix this. Now, we don't know how long it's going to take to fix it because we've got to take the whole thing apart. But I was sitting there going, like, is that a good experience? Absolutely. And it was a shocking one to me because I figured, okay, I bathed it in water when it was on, coffee, Coke, whatever. It was coffee in this case. I knew full well the thing was toast, like immediately. Like there's really nothing that could be done. But you know, to then be told, we'll order the parts, we'll fix it. We don't know how long it's going to take, but you know, we'll fix it for you. I was like, wow, like that's to me is a great experience. Like
Did they even go through the trouble of trying to fix it, or did they end up just giving you?
Well, they're gonna have to take it all apart. I think. I don't know what their process is, but you know, I'm looking at it going, and I serviced computers many years ago, and I remember having cases like this where people would argue with me, like, "Oh yeah, there's nothing in the computer; it just doesn't work." You took it apart, and like the circuit board's sticky from Coke or whatever they were drinking. And I'm like, yeah, they're not going to cover that under warranty, dude. Like that's pretty much fried. You pretty much killed it. But
well,
yeah.
I don't think they publicize this much, but I think in Apple's world, like if you walk into the Genius Bar and you have a broken, fairly new device, and if you have the extended warranty, even better. If you bought the Apple Care, even better. But they more times than not, they just hand you a new one. Like they like can't even. It's not even worth it for them to crack the shell on it to fix it. Like it's much easier and cheaper for them to just go, oh, that's really horrible. And whether they make you wait for a week or two, it's probably less cost, less resources for them to pull a new one off the shelf and ship it to you or hand it to you than for them to actually give you, to treat it like it's a car, to crack the hood, to run the diagnostics, to figure out what's broken, get the components, make the change. If that takes more than 2 weeks, they've already lost money, right? But if they just hand you a new one, then they're, they know they've got a customer for life.
Oh right? Yeah, but what if you went to a dealership? You had a car that you bought. It's clearly a lemon, no question. You've been there 3-4 times. They just said, okay, listen, we're not going to do this anymore. We're just going to give you another one off the lot, same configuration, same color. We got it. Here you go. We'll deal with it. That would be, I think, not only monumental for that customer who's a little frustrated, it would probably be a positive news story, like somewhere, right? And I'm not bragging about the fact that they did this. To me, it was shocking because I worked in that industry. So to me, for someone to, accidentally wipe out a computer, and I'd pretty much known it. As soon as I did that, I knew I was a little agitated, but I knew I killed it. Like there was no question for me. But for them to say, yeah, great news. We can fix that for this. I was like, wow, like that's impressive. I mean, by no means an inexpensive piece of hardware. So it's similar to a car. Like if you were to go to your Jaguar dealer and they said, hey, like you've been here 5 times, like clearly fixing it the first time didn't work out. Like, yeah, let's just solve this problem. Let's just solve this problem. And I'm thinking,
but maybe the only way to solve that problem is to not give them another Jaguar. That's the problem. That's the
yeah. Well, why don't you try a Land Rover this time and see how that goes? Well, I'll use the example of Lexus because a buddy of mine used to run a General Motors store in Surrey, BC, and now he runs a Lexus store in Kelowna. And I know Lexus is, experience amazing, I think is their tagline, or at least used to be when I owned one. And he said, when I worked at General Motors, it was always a fight over cost to fix the thing. There's a problem with the tire, there's a problem with the wheel, there's a problem with this, there's a problem with that. It costs this much. People would fight. He says with Lexus, it's like, yeah, okay, we're going to fix it. Here's a loaner car. We'll let you know. There wasn't like a cost discussion. It's like, listen, we'll just take care of it. Like, it's fine. We're going to fix it, right? But the cost was secondary. But the reason is because the reputation precedes that.
Right.
Like, I guarantee you, even if you had an Apple customer or another customer, maybe Samsung, if Samsung's your favorite there. I mean, I don't know. I don't have experience, but I would assume those brands are both well lauded in those different verticals, or Chrome, for example, if I had a Chromebook, for example, or even Microsoft. I mean, they have stores. I don't know how good they are, but they have a store.
Many years ago, I had an incident where this was a very long time ago, but so long ago, I typed them. I didn't write them, but I wrote. It was like in a mood where I wrote 3 complaint letters.
Yeah.
And the first one, the first 2, the resolution was the people just refunded me their money. But one of them was the one that I was actually most upset about. I think I was still a student. I think this was when I was still in university. Was I had over the course of a few months bought a set of Sony headphones. So I had 3 different Sony headphones, and all 3 of them crapped out on me. And so what I did was my letter, and it was on, at the time, York University stationery, because I had a job on campus, so I had access to York University stationery. And by the time I got to writing the letter to Sony, all it said was, "Dear Sony, your headphones suck. Sincerely, Matthew Growden," with my return address information. And I jammed the 3 broken headphones with the letter into the envelope, and I mailed that to them. And they called me. They were like, I got a phone call from Sony, and they were like, "We're really sorry you had this experience. Can you tell us a bit more about how our headphones suck?" And so I ended up chatting with this woman in their, I don't know if it was PR or marketing department, for half an hour, and then she's like, "We're going to ship you a new pair of headphones, the state of the art, the best earbuds we've got right now, and on us." So, it doesn't take much for people to turn around their opinion, to go from "Dear Sony, your headphones suck" to being the happiest customer. You just have to put in that effort.
Oh, I agree 100%. I mean, when you look at it, I think the key takeaways for me from this show, even though I think Larry had some interesting thoughts that I wasn't thinking about, but is, change is hard. You're going to have to do it anyway. The rate of change is probably speeding up, but it'll probably get easier eventually because it'll be embedded in things you do that you don't already know you have to change. And I'm already seeing that. The good side of change is I think the tools become better, that customer experience becomes better, and hopefully you can do more. And the opportunities, I think, are that, if you take the time to learn and adapt to change, you're probably ahead of the curve. But those are my takeaways. I mean, what is your thoughts?
Yeah, I still lean in, and it's funny because I just repeat this slide. I stole it originally from Brian Bensock, actually. Okay. He had that quote on a slide in his presentation back in 2019, and I still use it to this day. Maybe over the course of a 14-week semester, I show it to my students 5 times, because I think 5 is the right frequency, and just that they need to be able to, regardless, if we're talking digital marketing, social media, almost everything I'm teaching them today is going to be outdated in 2 years. Almost everything I teach them is going to have changed pretty materially in a number of months or years. Yeah. And so I think I'm like, if you learn one thing from this course, it is that you must be able to learn, unlearn, and relearn. You've got to be able to learn, unlearn, relearn. And I do think that aggregation of marginal gains approach, let's just find the 1% changes. Let's find the way where we can tighten everything, and that the aggregation of all of those changes is how we win, right? That's how we get better. Whether it's your eating habits, like Larry was saying, or your workout habits, or it's the operational changes you want to institute in your business. It's, start small, find them everywhere, and the aggregation will make you a better business. So.
Okay, and I will send you that quick video. I think you'll take a lot from it. It's long, but there's a lot of great data-centric stuff there. I can't speak to all the pieces because I haven't done it, but the gentleman behind it, he's a pretty versed individual. There's a lot of moving parts, but I think that
Awesome.
the big picture of it and the small pieces work together to get a goal accomplished. And since it's marketing centric, I think you'll probably be pretty and data centric. It'd be pretty impressive. Anyway, thanks very much as always. Have yourself a great day, and we're out.